See, that's where the music comes from. Hey, welcome to another episode of Still Kicking with Billy Howard. Yes, you can see our sophisticated music system right behind me. Well, you know I'm a Luddite, and that's what you're going to get, low tech all the time. Well, welcome to another episode. We are recording on Tuesday, April 11th, 2017, from the Emerald Green, Louisville, Kentucky. Yes, it's springtime here, and the grass is so green, it's almost blue. Well, welcome to Still Kicking with Billy Howard, where we resist. And in today's the Injustice Department blames victims of police brutality. Also, a Columbia, South Carolina prison called Kirkland fails to protect prisoners' lives. And do you know your Dawa? Dawa? What's that? Well, I'll tell you in a little bit. And on today's Fascist Spotlight, where we shine the light on American fascism, we're going to be talking about the bank crime sprees proceed apace. Criminal bankers have no fear of imprisonment. Propaganda, if successful, will push us into the hands of the criminal banking industry. So you'll want to stay tuned for that. And we are going to do the Luddite Lounge as usual, and I forget what we're doing. The Luddite Lounge is going to be about Elon Musk and his new brain implants. And boy, if that doesn't make your skin crawl, nothing will. Well, anyway, let's start out with the Justice Department. Injustice is the new justice. And, you know, Jeff Sessions, our new Attorney General, is relaxing the civil rights initiatives. They're not going to be investigating police departments for civil rights abuses anymore. They're pulling back, as they say, on these investigations of police brutality. And Justin said, you know, these investigations may have tied the police hands and damaged morale and contributed to an increase in murders. But, you know, it's a little bit like blaming the victim, because it's certainly not personal responsibility, which is what Republicans love to preach. You know, if the cops are held in low regard, they have no one to blame but themselves. And I don't mean to say cops, I mean police officers. Everybody knows we need police officers. And I believe that most police officers want to be heroes. They don't want to be terrorists, like these cowardly cops that are trigger-happy behave. Like the cops who sodomize people with broomsticks and billy clubs. You know, this kind of stuff happens all too frequently. And it's because the police have impunity. They never are convicted of anything, it seems to me. And this Jeff Sessions guy is a nightmare. So see, I'm not all pro-Trump. I don't like him. And he's also embraced the for-profit prisons, which Obama was rightly getting away from. Because, you know, for-profit prisons really do push incarceration. If you may remember, there was a judge in Pennsylvania who had a deal with a private prison to convict more. He was a judge in the juvenile courts. And he had a deal if he convicted more of these juveniles from the private prison. And he did just that. And hundreds of thousands of young men and women went to jail who would have never gone to jail before because of the profit motive. For-profit prisons is just like for-profit medicine. Because in for-profit medicine, there is no profit in preventing disease, only in treating it. And that's why we have very high AIDS rates in this country and very high diabetes rates. So that's a very bad thing that Jeff Sessions is doing. And he's also pulled out of a voting rights case in Texas, and I think that's terrible. So, you know, the Justice Department has never had too much regard for civil rights or even human rights, because after all, it was the Justice Department who legalized torture. It was John Yoo, or Kim Jong-il, as I So that's really bad. And I also want to say this about prosecutors, which Jeff Sessions is, a lifelong prosecutor. All prosecutors in this country, whether they are federal, state, or local city prosecutors or county prosecutors, are all guilty of extortion. They're guilty of extortion because if you don't plea bargain a case, if I'm arrested for, say, smoking pot, and I want a jury trial, the prosecutor will tell me, oh, you can have a jury trial, but we're going to increase the fines and the prison sentence by 5 times. Or you can take this plea bargain over here, where you'll just do this little bit of time. And this is what happens to everybody that's unfortunate enough to be caught up in our injustice system. And every prosecutor is an extortionist, and every prosecutor is a criminal, and every prosecution is malicious. And it truly is because of this one fact that they actually extort you into constitutional right to a jury trial. And this is common practice. It's just how injustice is done in this country. So the justice branch of all of our government scum, they really are. And the lawyers, the defense lawyers and the prosecuting lawyers, they're all complicit with this. No one's speaking out against it. Yes, I've heard some stories here and there and read some stories here and there, but that's just it, here and there. Nothing sustained. But the New York Times is going to say, we reported it, on the bottom of page 3. All right, so we won't get anywhere with that. Sessions is a jerk, so that's my opinion. 4 prisoners were found dead in South Carolina. You may have read about that story. It was Columbia, South Carolina, which I believe is the capital, and it was a state prison called Kirkland Prison. And it evidently houses their most violent criminals. I don't know if it's a total lot, what do they call that, an isolation prison cell. They think that low staffing levels may have contributed to it. 2 people were finally charged with the murders. It was two inmates who had killed, I think, a mother and her daughter, and that's why they were in that prison. And they lured other prisoners into their cell, and they would overwhelm them and strangle them to death. And they did this successfully to 4 people, and evidently there were no guards around to hear the struggle or to see what was going on. And so it looks like maybe low staffing levels had something to do with it. And I visit a prison here in Kentucky. I visited a prisoner who used to be a homeless boy in the neighborhood where I used to live, and I try to keep up with him. And he, suffered schizophrenia and did a lot of stupid things and got in trouble, and now he's in prison for a long, long time. And so I have to interact with corrections officers. They search me when I come to the prison, and they watch everything that we do. And I got to say, I was really impressed with how professional they are and how courteous they were. And how courteous they were to the prisoners. And I know this may just be in this one prison in Kentucky. And what I'm talking about, I'll just go ahead and tell you, is the Luther Luckett Correctional Facility in LaGrange, Kentucky. And those people are extremely professional, and they have a very, very dangerous job because, Massachusetts, a prison in Massachusetts back in this January, inmates took control of the whole prison. And in February in Delaware, a prison uprising ended the life of one corrections officer. So it's very dangerous work, and they should be properly staffed and properly paid. But unfortunately, the newspapers and the news media in general, they just don't care about prisoners. They don't care about prisoners' rights. They don't care when prisoners die from unnecessary illnesses, because prisons really aren't required to have doctors. Nurses and people die all the time in prison just because they weren't treated for cancer, or weren't treated for heart disease, or even AIDS. That's what first brought me to a prison, doing AIDS work. But anyway, from 2001 to 2014, 845 homicides have happened in state prisons, and that's about a 12-year period. And 24 of those homicides were in South Carolina. So the average homicide rate in South Carolina prisons is significantly higher than the national rate. So maybe Jeff Sessions should look into his home state. Now, this is an interesting story. This is about Dawa. And I don't know, many of us probably have never heard that word. I had never heard it until I read this article in Saturday's Wall Street Journal. And it's an article about a very brave woman named Yvonne Hirsi Ali. And she is from Somalia. And I believe she's a United States citizen now. She immigrated here legally. She is a research fellow at Stanford's Hoover Institute. And she is sounding the alarm on Dawa. And because she's doing this, she has multiple fatwas on her head, and she has to live with bodyguards. And she has bodyguards. And this reporter reported on her. And so obviously the Islamists think that she's a real threat to their agenda. And she's written a book called The Challenge of Dawa. And in short, what Dawa is a worldwide ideological campaign. In short, and even shorter term, it's missionary work for Islam. And she says people make the mistake thinking that Islam is just a religion, and she says it's not. It's also a political ideology. And the goal of the ideology is to impose Sharia law on all societies. That's what they want to do. They want it to be global Sharia law. And the goal is also to destroy the political institutions of free societies and replace them with Sharia law. Now, everybody's going to call me a nutter, I know. I've heard other people who worry about Sharia law saying it's not a worry. What are you worried about? Well, listen to some more. She says, we focus on acts of terror and the terrorist leaders, and we end up playing this endless game of whack-a-mole, which we've been at for over 10 years now. And so far, we've ended up with Islamic State, so it's not really working. And she says, a new leader will come, or even a whole new group will come. And Islamic State popped right out of Al-Qaeda. And she said that we make a huge mistake by ignoring Dawa, which is it's the missionary work of Islamicism. And she said when she came to this country, she was asked, are you a communist? Have you ever been a communist? And she thought to herself, well, that would have been a good question 30 years ago, maybe. But, what they should be asking now is, are you an Islamist? Do you read law? And I'm going to tell my producer, we're going a little dark here. I don't know if that's a problem or not. And they're not asking, are you as an Islamist, as far as we know, and they should be. Now, I know a lot of people want to stick up for Sharia law. I know that the head of the Anglican Church in England suggested that Sharia law be incorporated into Western common law, which I think is ludicrous. And she makes the point that, Sharia law is homophobic, but not in the way Americans think of homophobia. They're not against gay marriage. They don't just disapprove of gay marriage. They want gays to be put to death. And they would do it by pushing you off a building. They would do it by beheading you, or maybe even burning you to death, because gays like me are so vile to them. And I do expect to be called a racist and intolerant. And all I ask you people that think that I'm being intolerant, one country, one, has a free society. Oh, I don't hear you. That's not fair. You can write me and tell me. You can email us at my, sure what it is. Since my producer Pete knows all that and I know nothing. But she makes the point that Islamists have access to all the institutions of socialization. And she says that Islam, the religion, is really a Trojan horse for political Islam. And they are using families, they are using the schools to teach Islam, they are using the universities, they are using the prisons, and they are using the military, because there are Islamic chaplains doing that. And they are spreading political Islam, and we right under our noses. And the politically incorrect crowd are helping them, and she says that what we have to do, resisting this ideology, is akin to resisting communism, and we're to do it. And we're not narrative. In fact, thanks to Ronald Reagan, civics is no longer required in U.S. high schools. So even people born here don't even know what the Bill of Rights are. In fact, most high school graduates who were shown an unlabeled Bill of Rights could not identify it as the Bill of Rights. And not only could most of the students not identify it, when they were asked, when they were told what it was, and would you think these would be good laws for our country, they all said, no, you wouldn't be able to rule. You wouldn't be able to control anything. So, the Bill of Rights is under siege already without Sharia law. I mean, we don't really need the Islamists to take our freedom away, because the Democrats and Republicans are doing an excellent job. Obama did a wonderful job of reducing our freedom. And, of course, the Patriot Act was a major destroyer of our Bill of Rights. So even the Southern Poverty Law Center, she has denounced this woman. They've denounced her, and of course they've played in Islamist hands. And she calls them useful idiots, and she says that's a phrase that Lenin often used. And they've also, the Dawa people, the Islamists, have infiltrated the ACLU. And they have the ACLU protecting their right to preach Islam all around the country. And what this is basically is a liberal blind spot. We're so liberal, we're too liberal because, and this is why I say that, tolerating intolerance is a giant mistake. It's a huge mistake. You know, where are these moderate Muslims? What country do they live in? What Muslim country respects gay rights? What Muslim country respects women's rights? And we have enough problem with women's rights without Sharia law. So she also talks about this lack of assimilation. She says it's either assimilation versus Dawa. And they're telling immigrant Muslim families to the United States, even their children from Western society. In other words, don't let them interact. Keep them just with the Muslims. And I've got to tell you, I lived in an apartment complex before I bought this house where a lot of Muslims were moving in. And I believe that every immigrant that comes to this country, legally or illegally, should be treated with love and respect. And everybody in this country should be protected by the Bill of Rights, whether they're citizens or not. And as a Christian, I believe in loving everybody. But in my apartment complex, I could not say hello to anybody. People would not talk to us. They were keeping to themselves. And if you looked at their wife or you smiled at their wife, they would give you a look that made you fearful for your safety. And it made me very uncomfortable. I felt very uncomfortable in my own home. And an annoying thing is they smoke a lot of cigarettes. The men are big smokers, and I could never open my windows, just wafting up into my windows all the time. It's just silly. But really and truly, you're not seeing much assimilation, and we used to require assimilation. We used to, ask people questions and make them learn about the Constitution. So she's saying rather than letting them cocoon their children, instead, we should be exposing their children to critical thinking, to freedom, to our Constitution, to our Bill of Rights, and for the rights of women. Because not only do the Islamists hate gays and want us to put to death, they put women to death all the time. When there's an honor crime, they kill their own daughters. They never kill their sons. They never kill the boys. They always kill the girls. So I believe that she is correct, that Islamism is a lethal ideological movement, especially for gays and women. What more can I say? I'm politically incorrect. And now it's time for the Fascist Spotlight, where we shine the light on examples of American fascism. And fascism, in case you don't know what it is, if you've never seen it, it was invented by a man named Benito Mussolini in Italy in the early 20th century. And he came before Adolf Hitler, and Adolf Hitler copied him. But fascism was really just letting the corporation take over the state. And Hitler added racism to it. But basically, it's letting the corporations write the rules that they are regulated by. Because, government's job throughout the millennium has been to regulate the economy and to regulate crime. That's what they do. And when you let corporations write the laws and enforce the laws, then, of course, they have nothing to fear. And that brings us to our story about Wells Fargo. We're going to shine the fascist spotlight on Wells Fargo Bank. There were more abuses at Wells Fargo. In what's called Wells Fargo Merchant Services, LLC. I guess this is some sort of limited liability corporation, obviously, subsidiary of Wells Fargo. And they basically service retailers. And they get those little machines into and pay by card, whether it's an ATM or a credit card. And they are guilty, evidently, of high-pressure sales. Complex pricing were impossible to understand, and clients would find they're getting charged much more than they were thinking they would be charged. Also, costly termination penalties that lock in customers so they can't get away from this crooked bank. And they were also overcharging customers with inflated fees. They were raising what their sales actually were to something higher so they could charge them more of a fee. So they were basically stealing. Wells Fargo was stealing not just from their retail customers, but from their commercial customers. And the board of Wells Fargo has done their own investigation, and they have just released a 150 some odd page report, and they have said that they're going to claw back $75 million worth of bonuses that John Stumpf got. He was the former CEO. And they're going to claw back $47 million from his lieutenant, Carrie Tolstead. And she's going to fight it, evidently, with her lawyer. And what they did, basically, was they allowed 2.1 million Wells Fargo's customers' accounts to be opened in their name without their knowledge. And they also, didn't just abuse their retail customers. They were abusing their middle management or lower management. An example is one of the branch managers. There was so much pressure to meet these unrealistic sales goals. It's cross-selling, as they called it. That this one branch manager had a teenage daughter that had 24 accounts. Her husband had 21 accounts. Her adult daughter had 18 accounts. And her brother had 4 accounts, and her poor dear old dad had 4 accounts more. So they were, and then the limited liability company, the merchant services company, they were coaching bankers like her to put false information about customer sales into the system. So they stole from their customers, which is a common practice among entitled rent seekers like our bankers, sound like they're above the law. And they are. They commit criminal fraud, but now if a banker does it, it's called civil fraud. I guess they came up with that, somewhere at J.P. Morgan or Wells Fargo. So these crooked Wells Fargo merchant services will be administering the coming cashless society. Because there was an article in this week's Wall Street Journal about, and this was the headline, despite global curbs, cash still rules. In other words, a lot of people are still using cash, even though India did away with the 500 rupee note and some other country did away with their big notes. And according to this article, the reason why cash is still king, and this piece of was propaganda, fascist propaganda, by the way, was written by Adam Crichton. And he says the reason cash still rules is because of a thriving underground economy that's global, and tax evasion, and organized crime, and terrorism financing. It wasn't because people like me just want to have a little privacy. We don't want to leave an electronic trail of everything we buy and everywhere we go. And they quote 2 economists, a Harvard economist and a Princeton economist, who are both anti-cash. One, the Harvard economist, his name is Kenneth Rogoff, and he's written a book called The Curse of Cash. But what he really means is the curse of freedom. Also, Princeton economist named Allard Blinder, is also against cash, and they are campaigning mightily to do away with it. And I am a Christian, as you know. And in Revelation, a lot of predictions are made about the end times. We're talking about the end of the world as we know it. And one of the, they predicted earthquakes and floods and all these things, and plagues and famine would be, very common in the end times. But they also said that you would have to have the mark of the beast to buy and sell anything. Well, as soon as we have a cashless society, that will be true completely. It's largely true now because so few people use cash. But basically, that prediction said every transaction will be recorded. And that's exactly what they want to do. That's exactly why they want to get rid of cash. And this is, in my view, Satan's agenda. One world government and every transaction being recorded. That way, they can tax everything. And they can control us more completely. And it's always been my opinion that what computers, they sell computers as this empowering thing. But really what they do is they help the few control the many. Because the people with the most powerful servers will have the most power. But anyway, these economists may be in for a rough ride because 8% of the people in this world don't have bank accounts. So it's going to be pretty impossible for them to participate in a cashless society. But I'm sure they'll find some way around it. And now it's time for the last segment of our show, and my favorite segment, the Luddite Lounge. I am a Luddite, And this is a segment where it's okay to talk about the downside of technology, which you never hear about in our corporate press. Because technology, these cell phone companies, let's face it, they're big advertisers, so the New York Times really can't criticize them, and neither can the New Yorker, and neither can any of the networks. But there was an article in last week's paper, and I wanted to talk about it in the last show, or 3 weeks ago, I think. The great humanitarian Elon Musk, who wants to ditch Earth for Mars, has launched another company called Neuralink Corporation. And what this company is going to do, he says, is use neural lace technology, which is implanting tiny brain electrodes that may one day upload and download your thoughts. How about that for surveillance? You won't even have to carry your cell phone around. They'll just be in your brain. How's that? Doesn't that sound wonderful? Elon Musk in your brain. And he says this is going to be necessary to avoid humanity being subjugated by artificial intelligence. Now, they're condemning their own technology right by making that statement. And he said the way we will avoid this subjugation is by having direct cortical interface, which means a layer of AI, artificial intelligence, inside our brains. So Neuralink is registered in California as a medical research company. So all I can say to all you technology worshiping people out there and in the proletariat is that I hope that they don't hack your brain. Thank you for watching another episode of Still Kicking with Billy. Tuesday, I'm still kicking. Keep Elon Musk out of your brain. Live up, be free, and remember, I love you and I love American freedom.